If there's one thing we've come to learn about the internet, it's that the internet loves a genius. Actually, scratch that. The internet loves making geniuses. It'll put you on a pedestal, cheer you on, swear you're the future of your craft, and crown you king. Then the moment something feels off, everybody suddenly becomes Sherlock Holmes. People start zooming into your work at 400%, comparing screenshots, circling pixels, writing threads, and making videos. And just before you know it, the internet starts turning on those geniuses it made. That's pretty much what happened to Ross Draws. For years, Ross Draws wasn't just another digital artist. He was the digital artist for a lot of people. If you ever thought about getting into digital painting, chances are you've watched one of his videos. Plus, if you stuck around long enough, you probably learned something too. Ross had built a reputation around his skills. No gimmicks or shortcuts. He just showed years of practice, ridiculously good artwork, and a teaching style that made drawing feel a lot less intimidating. So, as long as digital art was the conversation, people trusted his output. Well, until January 2025 happened. A document hit the internet, and overnight, the whole conversation changed. People weren't showing up to admire Ross's latest painting anymore. Instead, they were showing up with magnifying glasses. Within hours, artists and fans were pulling apart his work, convinced they'd found something that didn't belong. AI in this case. Then came another claim. Ross had allegedly been using AI in projects for publishing partners who had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with it. Suddenly, this wasn't just another internet argument about AI anymore. It was now about trust. Because if the allegations were true, then it means one of the internet's most respected art creators hadn't just experimented with AI, he'd conveniently kept it to himself while feeding off people's hype and admiration for him. But then, how did one of the biggest names in digital art end up here? Well, to answer that, we have to go back to the beginning because he didn't just become Ross Draws overnight. Way before the millions of views, the Patreon, the brand deals, and the internet fame, he was just a kid in California who couldn't seem to stop drawing. And that obsession with drawing eventually turned into a career that thousands of artists wanted for themselves. Who is Ross Draws? The truth is that Ross wasn't born Ross Draws. His real name is Ross Tran, and long before millions of people knew him for bright colors, giant anime eyes, and ridiculously satisfying speed paints, he was just a kid who loved drawing.
Industry, creating characters, environments, world, universes, dragons, and things for TV, film, and everything like that. If you're unfamiliar with my work or what I do, there are some links you can check out in the description.
You know those kids who'd fill notebooks for fun and didn't really need someone to tell them to practice because they were already doing it? That was Ross. His obsession followed him into the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, where he studied illustration and character design. But getting a degree wasn't the only part that made people fall in love with Ross. The internet was. You see, the mid-2000s were an interesting time for art YouTube. There were plenty of tutorials and just as many incredibly talented artists. However, one thing that wasn't much available was approachable teachers. Some creators made incredible art but explained it like they were reading from an instruction manual. Others acted like every trade secret had to be guarded with their lives. Ross noticed the divide and landed right in the middle. He'd paint something that looked impossibly good, then turn around and show you exactly how he did it.
Follow along with. And tip number one is curves and color range. Yeah, these are two effects that I use to experiment with color and maybe change up the whole palette and feel of my pieces. Usually when we work on paintings for so long, these colors are baked into our brains, and so I just need something to shake things up. Let's use curves.
His videos weren't subtly hinting that his audience could never be that good, and he sure wasn't gatekeeping or stylishly talking down to beginners. He was all for showing his audience how to get it done and virtually hand-holding them while at it.
Or two, and I can inspire you guys to create whatever you guys want to create. Have you ever felt like you have these amazing, cool, awesome ideas that are just trapped inside your head and you can't get them on paper? Well, even if you are an absolute beginner or someone thinking about being an artist or picking up a new skill or something, I think I can help you.
And people loved it. His videos felt more like sitting beside someone who happened to be ridiculously good at drawing and less like technical lectures. Of course, people kept coming back. Consequently, one video became 10 and 10 became 50. Before long, Ross Draws wasn't just another YouTube channel. It had become a brand. His Patreon exploded and his YouTube tutorials pulled in millions of views. He had the attention of big companies that wanted to work with him. Brands reached out too, and book deals followed. From the outside, it looked like Ross had cracked the code that said, turn your passion into your job, turn your audience into a community, and turn your art into a career. It was every artist's dream, and Ross looked like he was living it. So, why then had he been caught in the internet's crossfire? Well, in addition to being the absolute big brother artist to beginners, every one of Ross's videos, live streams, and behind the scenes carried the same message. that getting good takes time.
Just don't think that our school is gonna make you a great artist. You know, only you can make yourself a great artist. You can improve anywhere. It's all about mileage. You can do it at home, you can do it at school.
Basically, he taught his audience that they didn't have to skip the hard part. They were to sketch, mess up, start again, and keep going. That was the whole appeal. He never came across as someone who was a fan of shortcuts. If anything, he made the slow road look worth taking. That's why so many artists looked up to him. Not only could he draw, he also made years of practice feel exciting instead of exhausting and made improvement look possible. And so, instead of seeing him as just another creator, a lot of his audience fell in love with his art and also trusted him. This is why it's easy to imagine how betrayed they must have felt when the accusations that he had been using AI right under their noses started. On the 26th of January 2025, an account named Bizul on X shared a 20-page long Google document that pointed accusatory fingers at Ross Draws for using AI in his drawings. The document was written by someone who went by FenixSoul or just Flen online, a former community member who had gotten close enough to Ross to help him at conventions, teach him software, and give feedback on his prints and projects. Now listen, this wasn't just a tweet, it wasn't also a subtweet. This wasn't even a thread. It was 20 pages of allegations with particularly interesting cropped out screenshots. So buckle up because we're going through all of it. The convention issue? Anyways, the whole drama started when Flen flew out to help Ross at X 2024. And before you say anything, it was not a local convention. Fen literally had to fly out despite having 2 jobs and overtime, hours just to make sure his bills didn't die while he was gone. So imagine landing in LA, ready to work, and watching Ross bring in a bunch of locals who had never worked a single convention in their lives and pay them minimum wage without blinking. They didn't have to have a series of conversations with Ross to convince him to pay them like Fen had to do. And there was no hesitation on Ross's end to pay them too. He just felt comfortable paying locals. Meanwhile, Fen, who had experience, who had flown across the country, and who had already done a previous convention for Ross, had to bring up the payment conversation himself, several times, in writing and in person. And Ross's response when he did, "I can take you far. Excuse you, exposure in this modern age? I mean, who does that?" Now, Ross has his version of events. He says Fen was paid $640 for the weekend, plus lodging, free merch, and a free badge for a whole other convention he wasn't even working.
And then I found out, yeah, we did pay him $640 for the weekend. We got convention lunches, dinner, accommodations, hosting that he asked for. I'm pretty sure I honored almost all of it. And, the convention right after, which he wasn't a part of, he asked for a badge to attend, and I was like, here you go. So we gave him a free badge.
He also admits that payment details weren't properly sorted before Fen arrived, and he took responsibility for that.
I wish we truly solidified business or payment talks before them coming here. That wasn't solidified, and they flew here, and then in person they asked if they could get paid, and I was like, oh shit, you know, like, this is really sensitive topics. I wish we could have ironed that out.
Okay, fine. Fen did get paid eventually, but the way it unfolded, I mean, watching someone with zero experience get sorted out without question despite the fact that Fen had been bringing the same issue up several times, that definitely didn't sit well with Fen, and we noticed that Ross conveniently skimmed over that aspect in his video. Oh, and Ross also floated the idea of Fen staying for San Diego Comic-Con the same month, unpaid, but he framed it as a vacation. A vacation. Fen's bills did not get the vacation memo though. He had roommates, bare minimum expenses, and had already sacrificed other bills just to make the trip work. When he finally put a number to what staying for Comic-Con would cost him, it was $830. But Ross's response was to rescind the offer entirely. And apparently someone in Ross's circle had the nerve to tell Fen that $830 was an egregious figure to bill Ross. Mind you, this is coming from a man who by his own admission was paying well over that for his own monthly expenses at the time he lived alone. But sure, $830 was too much to pay someone else for work they were doing for you. Make it make sense. Plus, it seems like nobody is talking about the dog situation enough. Oh yes, we're going there. Fen said that Milo, who is Ross's dog, had no toys, no treats, and at one point, an empty water bowl that Fen had to fill himself after realizing the dog wasn't misbehaving, but just thirsty. And when Milo was bothering Ross, the yelling that followed wasn't a light, "Hey, cut it out." It was a deep, low, aggressive register that made Fen visibly uncomfortable. And Fen's observation goes further than just one incident. He says we only ever see Milo when Ross needs content for Instagram or YouTube. The dog appears when the camera comes out. Otherwise, apparently he's on his own. Ross's defense was that he cleaned up the house for Fen's visit.
Owner, and when he came here, there was like no dog toys for Milo, and like, dude, there's so many. Like, Fen was a guest coming over to stay at my house. I cleaned up everything.
Dog toys everywhere aren't ideal for a guest, so he put them away. Fine, maybe that explains the toys. However, it does not explain the empty water bowl. It also does not explain the yelling. But again, Ross was hush on that. Moving on though, we've got to talk about the biggest elephant in the room, the plagiarism situation. Now this is where things get complicated. Fen alleged that Ross's character Hollow, with its retro tech aesthetic, bitmap textures, eye motifs, and sprite companion, was heavily inspired by, or maybe even outrightly lifted from, a mutual friend's creative work.
Fen is commenting on Ross's new character called Hollow, saying that there's no meaning behind his scars and eyes, that they were just added by Ross because it looks cool. They also pointed out Ross's self-insert character Flip from his Nima project, who has a passion for cooking and has
He also claimed Ross had to change his main character's original name after being called out for using the same name as that friend's character, Kid. And it doesn't stop at the character. Fen also said that Ross has a habit of hearing someone's idea, dismissing it in the moment, and then bringing it back up later as if it had come upon him like an inspiration from above. Oh, it also doesn't help that in addition to all of these, there was also Fen's project that Ross also miraculously resurrected like it were his. It happened that, as Fen said, he had an Atlantis project he was working on, something he discussed with Ross at AX, but guess who had the exact same idea after their trip? Yup, you guessed right. Ross was suddenly inspired to revive his own Atlantis project. I mean, that's impeccably crazy timing he's got there, don't you think? Anyways, Skill also mentioned having an OC named Icarus, and shortly after, Ross announced a project called Icarus. Now, these all look like small things individually, but when put together, it seems like a scary pattern anyone in Fen's shoes would have been right to run from. Well, Ross went deep on this in his own video. He said the character Fen alleged was copied from a mutual friend is literally a self-portrait, a kid in a hoodie that looks like him. And yeah, it does look like him. According to Ross, they were all just inspiration from his childhood memories, which makes a lot of sense, especially as he's a 90s kid who grew up with Game Boys, Sega Dreamcast, and the likes from the 90s.
My plagiarizing retro nostalgia from him, and I'm like, okay, retro nostalgia is a genre, you know, like fantasy and sci-fi, you know. I'm a 90s kid. I grew up with Game Boys and Sega Dreamcast, and like I grew up around this stuff for my new project.
Plus, after considering that his and this person's characters looking similar might jeopardize their art, since Ross had more influence between the two of them, he willingly decided to change his name.
And so, to protect the friendship and to keep the peace, I was like, hey, Beazle, I'm willing to change my character's name. And the look of relief on his face, he's like, really? I'm like, yeah, this...
And also for the sake of their friendship, he even said he would have celebrated Bizul, who happens to be the mutual friend in question, if both their characters launched at the same time.
Of Japan, and I don't want this to taint our experience, and I feel like we're friends. We've always found a way to iron out differences and have tough conversations. What's happening? If our characters both came out, I would celebrate you. I think it's so cool that we have a similar name.
Oh, well, Bizal didn't think that, and we now know that because of how much he's joined forces with Fen to push all of these allegations out. However, the detail that does not quite add up is that the day before the document dropped, Ross and Bizal were still texting each other casually. So, what could have gone wrong? Obviously, whatever had been resolved in Japan had not really been resolved at all, unknown to Ross. And the next morning, the 20 pages of allegations went public with, wait for it, Bizul's and Fen's combined efforts. Ross described learning that as one of the most disorienting moments of the whole situation.
The person think I plagiarized from, I was considering them like somewhat of a decent friend, you know, a decent confidant. So to see their true feelings about me after I thought we resolved everything was deeply...
Someone he thought was a friend had traveled to Japan with and even had dinner with the night before, and then boom, out of nowhere, was actively championing the allegations against him. I mean, you can understand why that must hurt. However, we must also understand why Bizal felt the way he felt. Both things can be true at the same time. The AI situation. Okay, to the main AI accusations that broke the internet. You should know that by January 2025, the art community had been at war with AI for years. Artists were watching their styles get scraped, replicated, and sold back to clients who no longer needed to hire a human. The conversation was volcanic. Careers were being disrupted. And right into the middle of all of that came the accusation that one of the community's most trusted figures, the man who built his entire brand on human skill and authentic process, had secretly been using the very thing his community was fighting against. Fen alleged that Ross had been generating images or elements with AI, and then painting over them to present the final work as fully hand-drawn. He pointed to a character sheet for Ross's new book with inconsistencies across different versions. The weird oversized sleeve, inconsistent hair, and a realistic render cropped out on the left that didn't match the rest of the piece.
Grain of salt. There's also this painting of the boy character. When you scroll down through the documents, feels like it has some AI influence.
He pointed to the Alphonse print, where the legs had mechanical artifacts that didn't make sense for a hand-drawn piece and a realistic, metallic render that appeared to have been painted over. He shared landscape images from the book that he said looked nothing like Ross's established style. And then he added that Ross had been repeatedly asking him how people felt about AI, sending videos of creators discussing it and all that. Ross even went as far as paying for Mid-Journey. Oh, can somebody tell this guy that he actually knows how to draw? In case he's forgotten. Now, experimenting isn't the crime here. We need to get this straight. The issue is the fact that Ross, who had preached the gospel of figuring out your artistic journey as you go, who had one of the most enviable clouts in the art industry, was paying out of pocket to use AI. Makes you wonder if he lost his mind during one of those mental health retreats he attended, because this is absolutely pathetic. In essence, Ross was testing the waters with Fen and waiting to see when the climate would be calm enough to come out about it publicly. And whenever Fen sent him content about why artists hated AI, Ross left him on red. Even Bizol warned about the effects of AI on artists. So, why is Ross dabbling into something unethical when he knows it is actually unethical? I guess we'll never know. Just as we'll never know if Fen's racism allegations against Ross is true or not, since Ross doesn't make mention of it at all. For now though, let's look at the dinner table incident. This one barely got coverage, and it really should have gotten more. Fen is black and Haitian American, so picture this. They are at dinner one evening, and Ross has seated the group by race. Koreans here, Vietnamese there. Then he referred to Fen as a diversity hire. You guys, who gives out seats according to skin color in big 21st century? Everyone at the table must have felt the awkwardness, but of course, nobody said anything. Ross's video also said nothing about this allegation of subtle racism towards Fen. For almost 40 minutes, Ross told his side of the story and very conveniently didn't even brush the subject of the racism Fen accused him of. That seems quite telling. Fen also pointed out that a dark-skinned character in Ross's book that Fen genuinely loved had been progressively changed over time. Gradually, he observed that the very Afrocentric character who originally carried an afro began to have a lighter skin tone, more coverage, and Eurocentric features. The newer versions had covered her up so much and lightened her so significantly that she barely resembled the original. Yet Ross's side of the story conveniently ignored addressing this. The silence. When the document initially dropped, Ross went quiet on all his socials, which, honestly, is understandable. If I woke up one day and found that someone was hurling 20 pages of accusations at me, and all I've worked very hard for, I would need some time to process things. So fares. Most people would also be sent into their heads if they were in his shoes, so yeah, we get it. Anyway, Ross's processing of the allegations against him took about a month. So, for 1 month, Ross stayed quiet and trust the internet to sort its own curiosity some other way. They began to fill the silences with their assumptions, observations, and personal biases until the entire thing took a shape that paid no heed to Ross's side of the story. Artists were still pulling apart his work. Fans were arguing over whether they'd been misled. Some believed Fen outrightly. Others felt there had to be more to the story than a 20-page document. Eventually, Ross broke his silence with a statement he posted on X and Blue Sky addressing the AI allegations. It wasn't a response to every claim Fen had made. Instead, Ross focused almost entirely on the one accusation that had spread the fastest. According to him, his first experience with AI dated back to 2022, when the technology was still new and many artists were experimenting with it. He described himself as naturally curious, admitted he'd explored the tools, and accepted that he hadn't fully understood how quickly the conversation around AI had changed. Ross also tried to put the scale of it into perspective. Out of more than 600 published artworks created over 16 years, he claimed only 5 had any AI influence. As for his latest book, he insisted that while AI had briefly been explored during the concept phase, none of it made its way into the final product. He apologized to his audience, apologized to the wider art community, and promised to do better going forward. For some people, that was enough. For others, it wasn't really answering the questions they were asking. The statement addressed whether he'd used AI. It didn't say much about the publishing partners, the collaborators, or many of the other claims sitting inside Fen's document. So, the chaos continued, and then Ross returned with something much more detailed. The return nobody was ready for. You see, when the accusation first came out, Ross's former assistant, Mindy, made a statement that she's now taken down or that is just currently unavailable to the public about how she felt during her time working with him. To Ross's credit, he didn't dodge this one in his video. He called Mindy a rock star, said he wished he'd done more to show her how much he valued her, admitted the raise he gave her wasn't enough.
Mindy was f***ing awesome, and so to read that, it hurt me, and I did feel for her, and I wish I could have done better. Mindy was an amazing assistant. She championed me, really was by my side.
He said everything was new and chaotic at the time she was working with him, and he was figuring it out as he went.
New at the time. You know, this was kind of like my first thing getting into it. I am pursuing my passion for a living and trying to figure it out. You know, we were growing. Yeah, we started.
He bought everyone lunch every day. He invested in an in-house editor. He invested in a shipping team for the Nima books. He was trying, by his own account.
I gave her a raise, not big enough. I invested in an in-house editor for the videos. I invested in an in-house shipping team because we had to ship out a lot of Nima books. Do my best to show my appreciation. You know, I bought everyone lunch every day. It was, you know, a lot of moving parts. You know, it's really chaotic, and I wish I could have done better to figure out the right moves. I should have made you feel more valued, and I'm sorry.
But trying and succeeding aren't the same thing, and Mindy's statement probably suggested that she felt the gap between those two things very clearly. So, was Ross's apology enough? That's between him and Mindy, but at least he looked it in the eye instead of pretending it didn't happen. Again, he admitted to experimenting with AI. Said it happened in 2022 when AI tools were brand new and he was deep in a creative block and desperate for anything that might help him get unstuck.
In 2022, I made a video thinking AI could be a great tool. It just started coming out and a lot of creators and artists was looking into it. It's this new shiny thing that spat out art vomit. It looked really ugly, the anatomy was broken everywhere, but it had like some cool promise, you know, some cool colors, some cool texture. And so my video was like exploring, this could maybe be a great tool to get out of your art block, to make maybe compositions, to get some inspiration.
Said he later stopped, came back from his hiatus and watched the firestorm around AI grow bigger and bigger. He naturally got scared and deleted all the content that he had used AI to build to hide his tracks.
Just being offline, and I asked my peers and I asked some people like, hey, what's the state of content these days? Like what's happening? Because I'm curious. Yeah, is it still TikTok dances? So as I slowly came back, I started to see this like really negative firestorm. As I saw this kind of firestorm get bigger and bigger and bigger, I was like, oh, this is too volatile, this is too much, and I backtracked and I tried to delete it because anyone that touches it seems like people like getting eliminated. And yeah, I was acting out of fear, you know.
Unprompted and with no PR statement prepared beforehand, Ross took ownership for his mistakes in his 37-minute video on YouTube. I fucked up, tried to hide it, and for that, I take full accountability.
Fucked up, tried to hide it, and for that, I take full accountability for. I apologize.
I mean, we'd pat Ross on the back for owning up to this and not trying to skirt around it till it blows over. However, his My Side of the Story video stayed silent on some specific and important allegations, like the publishing partners with zero AI policies, animal abuse, subtle racism, and whether anyone else's work ever went into the process without their knowledge. So, even though it's been almost 2 years since these allegations and his narration of his side of the story surfaced on the internet, many still run with the idea that he uses AI. And whether Ross realizes it or not, clarifying this would get a lot of people off his back. Anyway, if Ross's video was meant to close the book on the controversy, it didn't. Because, not long after his My Side of the Story went live, Fen returned with another document. This time, it stretched beyond 40 pages and was dedicated almost entirely to responding to Ross's defense. Unlike the first document, This one focused on challenging Ross's explanations rather than introducing brand new allegations. Take the AI allegations, for example. Ross maintained that he'd only experimented with the technology and hadn't fully appreciated how serious the ethical conversation around it had become. Fen disagreed. He pointed to private conversations, messages, and discussions dating back to 2022, arguing that Ross had been warned about the growing concerns surrounding AI years before the controversy became public. Size. This is a whole lot of back and forth at this point. Fen also pushed back on Ross's claim that only 5 artworks had AI influence. He highlighted convention prints, Patreon tutorials, promotional artwork, and commercially sold pieces, which, in his opinion, suggested the number could have been higher than Ross acknowledged. The document also revisited another major point from Ross's video, which is about their relationship. Ross had presented Fen as someone who wasn't particularly close to him. Fen responded by producing years' worth of messages, photographs, convention work, and personal conversations to argue that they were far closer than Ross had suggested. Also, we later find out that the screenshot Ross had shared, portraying Fen as a parasocial fan who was just begging to be fed and counting down to getting dinner from Ross, was all a lie. Follow the dates carefully and then read this screenshot. Apparently, the countdown was inspired by a video Ross had made about another fan who had DM'd him for 1 year straight and gotten an OC from that consistency. So Fen counting down to day 365 was so that Ross would share some of his gay characters with him? Why, pray tell, would Ross put out that one screenshot knowing fully well that the message he was passing across to his audience wasn't true? Thoughts and thoughts. Maybe if he had maintained the truth of the story without portraying his relationship with Fen as parasocial, Fen wouldn't have gone all the way to reveal all of these to the public. Quite an unnecessary move if you ask me, but we're here now. So, whether people agreed with Fen or not, it became clear that this wasn't a disagreement between two strangers who'd only crossed paths once or twice. By this point, the controversy had evolved into something much messier than a debate over AI. It had become two people presenting completely different versions of the same history, each insisting the other had left out the details that mattered most. To wrap it all up, now, if we are really keeping it a buck, Ross Tran made real mistakes. He experimented with AI, hid it, and only came clean when he had no other choice. He handled the payment situation with Fen poorly, regardless of what he eventually paid. He never addressed the dining table comment. He never addressed the character whose features changed. And his return to posting before fully resolving those open questions read as tone deaf to a community that was still waiting on him. But Fen's document also needs to be looked at with clear, unbiased eyes. He admitted his proof on the AI accusations is sparse. The screenshots in his documents show inconsistencies, yes, but style inconsistencies alone aren't a confession. After all, artists change, experiments happen. And reading both accounts together, the convention situation looks less like deliberate exploitation and more like two people who had completely different understandings of what their arrangement was and never put any of it in writing. The plagiarism situation is genuinely murky. Retro nostalgia is a genre. 90s kids who grew up with Game Boys all share the same references. A kid in a hoodie that looks like you is not evidence of theft. However, repeatedly lifting ideas from the people around you, changing a character's name only after being called out, and then presenting everything as purely your own creation is a pattern worth examining. And there's the parasocial dimension of all of this too. Fen got close to Ross because he wanted to get close to Ross. We need to put that out there. He wanted the friendship, he wanted the introductions, he wanted the career opportunities that proximity to someone like Ross could provide. When none of that materialized the way he'd hoped, the frustration that had been building for months found its way into 20 pages of public accusations. Ross Draws built something genuinely rare online, a community that didn't just watch him but trusted and learned from him. They believed in what he said the creative process was supposed to look like, and that trust was more of the product people fancied than his art. As expected, when it came out that the person asking them to trust the process had been skipping parts of it in the background, the hurt went beyond just AI, but also made them rethink if they were getting what they actually deserved. Ross has taken accountability for some of it, and honestly, that's more than a lot of creators in his position would have done. But some things remain unanswered, and in this age of screenshot archives and communities that treat inconsistency like a cold case to be solved, unanswered questions don't go away. Whether Ross Draws can rebuild the community and trust he used to have depends entirely on if he's willing to answer the rest of them.